Well, hello there, everyone, and welcome to our podcast, Adapting to the Evolving Education Technology Landscape. We've got a discussion here today for you that we hope you will enjoy. We're going to focus on how schools and universities out there really can adjust to all the technology changes, also do it securely. We're also going to talk about this concept of what a safe school is and how you can build one by using secure tools that are designed for the hybrid cloud like HPE Alletra, powered and paired with those HPE ProLiant Gen 11 servers, in turn powered by 5th generation Intel Xeon Scalable processors. I'm James Hilliard, glad to be here as the host for the conversation. From WEI, account executive Mark DeChico is going to join us in just a moment. Kick things off, talk a little bit about how they work in the education space and some of the technologies that they bring to bear to help organizations on their kind of data modernization journey here. And then really happy to be able to bring to you a recent conversation. I was able to sit down with two experts. Chris Robinson, he is the CTO for storage for HPE, and then Anya Kamenetz, and she is an award-winning journalist. She's an author, a thought leader, really looks at the future of work and education and technology. And again, we had a chance to talk about some of the trends going on in the tech world that impact the schools and education, and then talked about securing the physical environments as well, and doing it for all sorts of constituencies, whether they're researchers at universities, obviously students, you've got parents, you've got teachers, et cetera. So a cool conversation that we do want to bring to you in just a couple minutes. But first, Mark, appreciate you and the WEI team sponsoring this event, and wanted to start at a high level, just the WEI team and how you all do interact with and support education customers out there.
Sure. Thanks, James. Thanks for having me. WI is an engineering-led reseller and integrator. We're engineering-led in the sense that our CEO, Belisario Rosas, is an engineer himself, and we're engineering-led in the sense that we have a deep bench of about 90 engineers. So we have subject matter experts that know a lot of different technologies and OEMs and services. As far as EDU goes specifically, we've been really fortunate over the years to develop long-lasting relationships with a number of schools. And we found this is an industry that there's a lot of collaboration amongst themselves. And so when you put the customer first and you enjoy mutual success, word tends to get around. So that's worked out great. I'll give you one example of how we've helped colleges and universities. We're seeing that they often have pretty sizable data center or network refreshes every few years. And there's a lot of change that takes place in that time in the market. And our engineering team essentially lives in a perpetual state of assessing, designing, and deploying infrastructure. So with our vast knowledge of education and also with technology in general, we're best able to help clients with adopting up-to-date practices, methodologies, and incorporating industry-leading technologies into their future architecture.
And I can only assume that, right, you work on one project in the EDU space, you learn something. You're able to bring that to the next one and kind of jumpstart, their projects. But what is it that your customer base says kind of differentiates you in the WEI maybe approach as opposed to maybe others out there in the market?
Sure. So there's many ways that I think WEI is better than other resellers. I touched on one point about being engineering-led, and another about understanding EDUs well. But we're also debt-free and privately owned. That affords us the ability to be really flexible with our customers in meeting their needs. We're also minority owned, and I know that's important to many organizations as they look to where to invest in the future.
Let me ask you about the education space, the customers that you all are working with now. Obviously, we know data is the new, gold or oil, whatever resource you want to call it, and analogy. We also know that there are so many different types of data that are coming to universities. I mentioned there could be research data that can be very sensitive. Sure. You've got student data, which also includes health data, financial data. I mean, there's just a lot there. What are they asking, the universities and the schools? What are they asking of WEI in terms of securing and managing all this data and some of the things that you're bringing to bear?
Yeah, sure. So we're actually seeing a lot of customers look to operationalize technology consumption. Seems to be a recurring theme. And HPE's GreenLake platform offers cloud data services. It's simple to consume. It provides a single pane of glass to provision and manage data services in a cloud operational experience. Beyond that, HPE and WI are helping customers to adopt a zero trust framework, allowing customers to build security into everything, and that's paramount these days. So there's a ton that WI and HPE and GreenLake brings to the table around this. I mean, this type of one-to-many podcast is great for getting the word out, but I'd highly encourage anyone interested to set up a one-on-one with their HPE rep and their WI rep to kind of talk about your specific challenges and how we might be able to help.
And let me do this. And I'll bring this stuff up on screen at the end of the conversation as well. But folks, a couple of ways that if you don't have a team in place at WEI, you can reach out, right, and engage with them. So WEI.com, that's the easy one. Phone number 603 893 0900. And again, I'll bring that up on screen at the end of the conversation. Our conversation does continue right now. As I mentioned, had a chance to sit down with Chris Robinson. He's the CTO for storage at HPE. And then Anya Kamenetz joined us. And again, award-winning journalist, author, most recent book was The Stolen Year. And that looked at the education space during that COVID time and kind of the impacts of students and some of the shutdowns of the schools and things like that. So some interesting takes that Anya had. Looking forward to sharing that with you. But we started the conversation with Chris and really wanted to get his idea of what are some of the trends out there, right? The major security and storage challenges that he's seeing with most of the higher ed institutions that he deals with on a regular. So take a listen.
So one of the biggest things that we're seeing is that the higher education and I mean even state and local education, they're looking at ways to collect data around the security of their campus, whether it's audio, video data, other security measures that they're taking, and collecting that data for a set period of time. And not only a set period of time, but they also want to be able to secure that data. They want to make sure that that data is immutable. And what we mean by immutable is that data can't be tampered with should there be a ransomware attack, or there is some other virus or malicious intent toward a lot of these campuses, because they do have research data and they do have very specific data to students and student owned data. That is where we come in. Not only can we store that data, we can protect that data. We can say that data is not going to be adversely affected if by chance someone gets into the system. If ransomware gets into the system, how do I get that data back? Because the security of that data is as important as the data itself.
Do you find in the higher ed groups that you work with, there's kind of equal balance of protecting themselves, the university, the institution, and protecting the student data, balance of budget, or is there a little bit of an imbalance that you see out there?
No, it's pretty well balanced because the data that the students have is critical to their education. Almost everything that they do is now online. It is captured online. It's on servers. It's used for collaboration between teams in higher education, and even more so nowadays than when we were in school. Collaboration meant, you went to a chalkboard or a whiteboard, depending on your age, and maybe you took a picture of it or you sketched a note of it. Today, there are smart boards and there are other mechanisms that they use. They use Teams. My son used Teams to do a lot of the work in college, and protecting that data is important to them because they have collaborative works that they are doing. So there is no real difference between the importance of the data. A lot of it is actually co-located on the same systems. The IT administrators will slice out a portion of space for the student body work versus the research professor, or anywhere in between. Even if you look at admissions or you look at any of the back end office, all of that data doesn't sit on disparate systems. And many times they sit on the same core system and they have to have the same rules in place for protecting that data. So there really isn't a huge difference between the importance of the data from one side to the other anymore.
There has been a great deal of technology investment growth in education in the last 5 years, right? COVID had a major play there because of the CARES Act out there and other things that put a lot of money into technology to make the transformation, right? To continue to try and continue the education when we couldn't be there in person. With that said, a lot of new technology emerged. What I have seen, love to get your thoughts here, and really you're speaking maybe on behalf of the universities and schools out there. A lot of people try new stuff, but it seemed like a lot of things have come back to the leaders. You mentioned teams out there, obviously HPE and Intel together as leaders in the industry. Have you seen that consolidation back, and that a lot of the universities are going for the tried and true, the companies like HPE that have been investing in the security of systems for the longest of times?
Very much so. There was a period of time where a lot of up and coming companies presented themselves to the education space because they would have a cost factor that was in line with tighter budgets. It has dramatically changed in that a lot of those companies either didn't make it through different transitions in the economy, or their funding dried up, and those companies have come back to those of us, the HPEs of the world, running Intel, versus having these startup companies, because they need that reliability. They need to have a system behind the system, and what I mean by that is they need companies that have proven themselves across multiple industries, not just education. But if we're in, manufacturing, and we're in supercomputing, and we're in government agencies beyond state and local government, we're talking, the big federal government agencies, they look toward that standing, and saying that, okay, this is a reliable technology to go with. I can't afford to spend the least amount of money. I need to spend the best amount of money, and I need to get the most value out of what I'm spending my money on. And that's where we come in, because we can give them a very cost-effective solution, regardless of what their budget is, with the same type of reliability across platforms, depending on what they want to do.
Last thing, Chris, I'd love to try and get from you briefly, but somewhat success story type of answer here in terms of the institutions that you've worked with. And you've seen them invest in security and data protection, and they're doing a really good job. What do they come back and say they're able really to do for the students, for the faculty? Right? What are the big successes when dealing with the ransomwares out there, securing the campuses, all that type of stuff? One or two that come top of mind.
Yeah, so we've worked with school systems that have in fact been hit by ransomware. And one of the things that we work with them on is that the solutions that we provide, they may not even have known that they had capabilities in our systems that they had already paid for, that they realized they didn't take full advantage of. And we're able to come in to them and do, just a conversation with them of, here's the solution that you have from us. Did you know that you can implement these safety measures for your data at no cost, because it's already included in the system? So I think a lot of these higher education environments buy technology, and we've gotten better at explaining what the technology is that they have, and how to get the most out of it to protect themselves, and not be subject to paying huge ransoms. And not all ransoms are actually honored, right? They get the money and they don't do anything. They go away. The bad actors don't necessarily always stick around when payment is made to them. And, we're able to go in and, protect them from getting to that point, across the portfolio, and beyond. There are so many different solutions now versus what there were 10 years ago. But a technology that we came out with on the 3PAR technology, for example, was something called virtual lock. It came out of the requirement to protect data for regulatory purposes. Little did we know 10 years later that ransomware would be unintended, I don't want to call it an unintended consequence, but a nice consequence of regulatory compliance, that we were able to lock down data to protect it from ransomware, if that makes sense. The ability to have a happy coincidence of technologies that can get repurposed down the line from where it was originally intended. That's where it comes in and is very fruitful for the state and local educators. A lot of what we've done in the financial industry too. The security that we have for the financial industry, for even management, so cloud-based management, which is they're also looking toward going to. The financial industry gave us the guidance for what we needed to do. The benefactor of that is state and local education, because we didn't have to design it for them, but they can take advantage of that security that we put in place.
Because a lot of these issues that we are talking about, whether it's securing a facility and people, whether it's securing data, et cetera, that does cut across everything: small, medium-sized businesses, large enterprises, federal government, state government, schools, et cetera. So I can see how a lot of that can play across those different verticals. Appreciate it, Chris. Anya, I want to get you involved for the remainder of our conversation here today. And hearing from Chris, great setup on the ways that technology is being utilized to keep schools safer, the data safer, students, faculty safer. But it's not just all about tech. And so I do want to talk about the people part of it, and really start there with you and your perspective on the mentality of many of the schools and universities out there. Are they a student security first mindset these days?
I do think that there's more awareness of security than there has been in years past, and that comes from so many different directions. I think the necessity to, understand that you're really safeguarding students' emotional lives, that you're responsible in some ways for the way that they interact and treat each other on campus, the imperative towards diversity and inclusion, as well as this hybrid environment. I mean, I think it's pretty simple to say that since the pandemic, all education to some extent is hybrid. And whether that's for, over a snow day, or whether that's over an entire 4-year undergraduate career, the online and offline worlds are meshing. And that means that our education leaves a data trail. And that's just not, it's even more sensitive in some ways than health information. It includes health information, includes mental health information, but you're safeguarding students' futures, right, with their academic records. So it's a huge responsibility. And I do see schools stepping up to recognize that.
Yeah, the focus on the academic records you mentioned, right? There are schools, they provide healthcare to students. So you've got health information, you've got financial. If that gets wrecked on a young student early, one, they're trying to focus on their grades and their studies and the group, and then to add that on top, what a nightmare for them to be getting started as a young adult coming into the business world and all that. So I'm glad to hear that you do see kind of a focus there. Anytime technologies get rolled out, there's a learning curve and there can be some pain. We saw a lot of the kids that are in college now are the ones that went through the COVID time frame, extended learning at home during the high school years. Are you seeing them very much attuned to utilizing the tools and understanding how to use these technology tools themselves safely, not just relying on the built-in safety features, but just being smart netizens and smart computing, students out there? Do you see that in the world right now?
I think that first of all, it's important to recognize, because we talk a lot about the deficits that came from the COVID-19 pandemic, and technological ease and flexibility and the ability to interact online was a benefit that a lot of students experienced. And sometimes people feel like maybe it goes too far and that students would prefer to take a class online rather than show up somewhere. And so how do colleges get them to show up and get them to engage and get the benefits that only in-person can provide? So, parking that concern for a second, what do we think about, how students are learning to engage as digital citizens? I think that's a very complex and multifaceted question. And, it has a lot to do with what is the motivation of our students as they're engaging in their educational careers, because security risks, they don't just come from a failure to understand how a product works. They also come from the what is student experiencing and how are they feeling about their career and their goals and their future that is causing them to then interact in a certain way that's either careful or less careful, right? Or maybe even be antisocial or less socially adept than we'd like them to be. So these are all things that colleges are having to step in and help coach students on, and hopefully help them see the big picture, because interacting safely online is something that we're all having to deal with at a higher and higher level as we go in the future.
As I was talking with Chris, we mentioned a lot of technology was thrown at because there was a lot of money in education due to certain acts out there that a lot of technology came in. Have you seen where we stand now? Was there we got all this tech, set it, forget it, and they're just dealing with other things? Or is there a new understanding from the IT professionals in order to keep these schools safe, not only physically, but also the data, that there's a constant kind of evaluation of, okay, we have these tools. Are we using them to the best ability? Do we need to augment them with new tools? Do we need to move on and get something else?
I think that in some ways, any organization in their change management, they're always managing the last disaster. And so in the realm of, this fast changing environment and data breaches and ransomware, that there's oftentimes a defensive mindset, and that does lead to a lot of urgency. So what I find is that colleges and universities, in particular, they are very ready to adapt and adopt new technology policies when they perceive a danger. And sometimes maybe to a fault. They're going to devote more resources to cleaning up after something or stopping something scary from happening versus proactively embracing what is the positive future that we could create using technology. So I definitely feel that there's a level of engagement around new technologies that maybe we didn't see before. But the question is how much of that is fear-based versus being attuned to the possibilities.
Oftentimes, Anya, my conversations in the technology space follow this formula: people, process, technology. It's the three things that we talk about. The schools that are creating the safest schools, again, digitally and personally, what do they focus on the most and the best? Is it the people? Is it the process? Is it the technology? Or what percentage of the three do you see?
Across the board, it has to start with people. So, the research tells us that safety comes from trust. Trust comes from relationships, and relationships are embedded in a culture that really starts from the top through leadership. So we really need to be investing in our people to make sure that our people understand that it is a priority, right? That we have a culture on a campus where we treat people with respect. And that includes your data. That includes transparency and honesty. It includes being able to say if you've messed something up and exactly what has happened and exactly how we're going to fix it. So I think that's really a tone that's set across the organization. So your processes are only going to be as good as the people that are implementing them, hopefully with fidelity, hopefully with a sense of agency that they have, that it's not somebody else's job to fix a problem.
The Stolen Years was one of your latest books, well received, gave a great perspective on what a lot of people went through during the COVID timeframe. Obviously, very heavily focused on the students and all. What is your view now? Have the students gotten that stolen year back? What's the still a lingering effect that you see? And what about the educators as well, the professors, the lecturers? Did they get the time back? What do you see for us? What's that status?
That's a great question. And it's really, really important. So our educators went through the pandemic just like their students did, and they are experiencing the lingering effects of burnout, and sometimes vicarious trauma. So seeing that their students were having such a hard time, now they're having a hard time too. And a lot of times we are, there's so much recognition of the youth mental health crisis, but we're not necessarily supporting the adults who surround our students in the way that we should be, and to enable them to really bring a future forward. What I find is that the successful institutions, maybe paradoxically, are the ones that are able to talk about what happened and what they did and how they responded and extract the learning from that. So schools that have really pivoted, who are really talking about how they're doing things differently, who are becoming more resilient, more layered, and more flexible in their delivery of their education, that's a successful strategy. When we're going to just revert back to exactly the way we did things before, and we're going to turn up the urgency on people. If people aren't showing up, we're not going to ask why they're not showing up. We're just going to, increase the penalties for not showing up. That's where you start to have a problem. So the more we and I'm really glad that you brought this up, because the more we put our arms around the problem, and also the benefits as well. I mean, I alluded to this earlier. We learned something from the pandemic. Collectively, we learned what we're made of. And I think a lot of communities, a lot of institutions really gained a strength and an ability to adapt and pivot very quickly. And as we start to see that as a strength, that's where we can start to move forward.
And it sounds like some advice from you, and I might be putting words in your mouth, so correct me if I'm wrong, but it's to remain kind of vigilant and a little bit of that sense of urgency and acceptance of change and looking at change that we went through that forced upon us, to not just fall back on our laurels and say, all right, we can just do things how they are. We still need to continue to evolve, modernize, whether, again, it's our networks, whether it's our interpersonal communications, student to parent to instructor, et cetera.
That's exactly right. I mean, the world is only going to maintain this level of unpredictability or increase from here. Those are really the only two options. And, the advent of AI, it's not as catastrophic as the pandemic, but it's certainly an existential threat to the way we think about what is knowledge, how do we deliver it, how to young people demonstrate their value in a fast changing world. So it's really time to look at the COVID-19 pandemic, not as a black swan one-off event, but as a learning opportunity and a real fire drill for people that want to figure out how do we pivot and change everything on a dime, because we're going to have to do that more and more in the days to come.
Because disruptions are not going to stop. They are always going to come. And so we have to, again, not forget about that last one that really shook us, but be ready for the next one. What can we apply? Otherwise, everything we learned was lost, right?
That's exactly right. And that doesn't mean that we're in battle mode all the time. It means we learn from what happened, which is you have to take care of your people, you have to take care of relationships. Rest is important. Rest is a right. So these are all things that we're going to beat the robots, not by becoming robots, but becoming more human.
All right, folks. Well, I hope you enjoyed what you heard from Anya and Chris there. A lot going on, a lot of changes in the education technology landscape post-COVID and in this hybrid cloud era that we find ourselves in. We hope that you all have some additional questions and thoughts that you might want to continue this conversation with team members like those over at WEI. They can absolutely share more about their process and what they bring to the education space. Also can tell you more about the technologies like HPE Alletra, which can be paired with HPE ProLiant Gen 11 servers powered by those 5th generation Intel Xeon Scalable processors. Here's what you can do to reach out and get more online. Really easy, WEI.com, and then a phone number for all of you, 603 893 0900, 603 893 0900, and again, WEI.com. With that, on behalf of Mark and Chris and Anya, thank you for joining us. I'm James Hilliard, and we do look forward to talking to you all down the road.